Thank you very much this morning. I'm delighted to be here this morning. My name is Ciara Kennedy. Up until about 2 weeks ago, I was the Chief Operating Officer of Lumena Pharmaceuticals, a small San Diego-based company. And now I'm the head of cholestatic liver disease research, which sounds a very grand title, of Shire Pharmaceuticals. So I am here today to tell you about what our companies have been up to in Alagille syndrome over the last couple of years and what we look forward to doing in the coming years. Cholestasis really centers around, for us, centers around bile acids. So impaired bile flow. I'm sure many of you who have your children have liver disease, you hear about paucity of bile ducts, so fewer bile ducts, smaller bile ducts, which leads to a reduction of bile flow into the intestine and a buildup of bile in the liver and in the circulation. And that's really what we are centered on in terms of a treatment for this disease of cholestatic liver disease. What we are focused on in the intrahepatic liver diseases, including Alagille syndrome. We do have active programs in other liver diseases, PFIC, pediatric disease, and other adult programs as well, but all of what I'm going to tell you today is really focused on the Alagille syndrome work. So clinical research. Like many things in life, and I would say almost everything in life today, it's really a collaborative process, a collaborative effort. In general, in rare disease, it often can start at a small company, a company that's intensely focused on one mechanism or one drug or one disease. And that's really what Lumena was, focused on the liver. Everything was focused on bile acids and how we can merge those two things into potential treatments for patients. But we're not in this alone. We work with the Children's Network. I'm sure many of you know our for your management of your care that are in the network, CHOP, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, all the big centers that treat a lot of patients with Alagille syndrome. And along with the Children's Network comes the NIDDK, funding the network, making sure that the infrastructure is there to conduct research is a critical part syndrome. So many ways in which we wouldn't be where we are today without the collaboration and help of the Alagille Syndrome Alliance. An organized patient advocacy effort goes a long, long way in any type of research, but particularly in rare pediatric research, to really coalesce the community around the disease and around the research that's ongoing, as clearly by everybody sitting here today. But without the families, there's nothing to study. There's no families to interact with. So almost at the epicenter of any of this research are you, patients, the families, the Alagille syndrome community. Many of you may be you're aware of or unaware of, you probably have already contributed to the research that is ongoing in Lumena, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that today. Lumena is a small company, but we were fortunate to have interacted with a very large and forward-looking visionary company like Shire. Shire is a company that is dedicated to advancing rare disease research. They have the infrastructure to conduct global clinical trials and get this product, should it prove beneficial, out to patients all over the world, which obviously is critically important. Lumena was a 17-person company at the end. We had 9 clinical trials going on in 5 different indications with 2 products. We were exceedingly busy. I don't think our feet really touched the ground very often. But now we're a company, and that just gives us a lot. Something that struck me from the beginning of our interactions with Shire is that they coalesce around as a company, as the people we help. So we can all work hard, but at the end of the day, we go home. And it's the patients, the families that live Alagille syndrome 24 hours a day, ride the waves and learn how to surf, that are the bravest of all. And I've been so inspired working in this ever had because of the people who are in it with us. So when a company like Lumena is starting off research in that, it's not experts. We talk hours and hours talking about this disease, about how it's treated, about how it manifests, about what the treatment options are, where the deficits are in terms of treatment options, and the handheld? Sure. Let me just take this. That's okay. Apparently I wasn't speaking loud enough for everybody to hear, so hopefully this will be better. So as I said, we've spent a long time talking with experts in the US, in the UK, all over the world. And Alagille syndrome, both from a physician and really from a patient perspective, doesn't really differ that much. We have found there's nothing special about US patients versus UK patients. It's really a global disease, and that's not always the case. It's helpful in terms of clinical research when there's more uniformity, and that's certainly what we have found in our research. Very importantly, we spend a lot of time focusing on the patient perspective. Nobody knows this disease as well as you do from your viewpoint and your daily interaction with this disease. So again, many hours of discussion with Cindy Hahn and the Alagille Syndrome Alliance team in terms of understanding the disease, understanding the patient voice, what they're hearing about what families need, what patients need, where the gaps are. We have leveraged data from surveys that the Alagille Syndrome Alliance has put up and delivered to the community. We have leveraged data from the LOGIC study, the genetic study that's ongoing through the Children's Network. And that's why I say many, if not all of you, have participated in this research in some form or other. We have conducted our own interviews with families. We have conducted probably interviews with about 70 to 80 families across the world, and that has led to the largest database of detailed information around Alagille syndrome, in particular the symptoms associated with the disease, itching, and the impacts of those symptoms on your daily life. We also spend a lot of time talking to FDA. We can go off and do a lot of research, but if FDA is not aligned with that research, then it all goes for nothing and we don't get the drug approved and make it widely available to the patients who need it. So we spend time talking to them about what we're doing, how it's going, what we plan to do, and I would say it's been a very collaborative, productive relationship in this instance, and I think that's to a large degree helped by the fact that Dr. Andrew Mulberg is the deputy director of the division that we work with, and he is a pediatric hepatologist who did his residency at CHOP, has treated Alagille syndrome patients, has treated Cindy's daughter. So he has an intimate knowledge of this disease, which isn't always the case. I mean, they're human beings just like the rest of us. They're doing their job, and they're dealing with onslaughts of information. In this case, we have an asset and a resource there for us who understands this disease in a way that is unusual. So with FDA, normally you have to educate the FDA specifically about this disease. We still have to go through that process. We still have to support that process. While Andrew may be a supporter of ours, we still have to check all the boxes that FDA requires. And we talk about study endpoints and what we will measure and how we will measure it, and I'll talk about that in more detail. So one of the things that when we started doing research into Alagille syndrome and the particular mechanism that we were evaluating, we looked to the literature. We looked to how bile acids have been regulated in the field of pediatric cholestasis and what that tells us. I'm sure some of you, and we're going to hear more about this from Dr. Piccoli, some of you have heard of or maybe gone through the experience of a partial external biliary diversion surgery, really to drain bile acids directly from the gallbladder into a bag. So you're sucking bile acids out of the system. And what that results in is reduction in bile acids, which is what you would expect. And that is associated with an improvement or reduction in bilirubin, so the liver is getting healthier, and a reduction in the symptoms of itching. So this to us is really encouraging data. The data is very comparable generally from Alagille syndrome and PFIC, one of the other pediatric diseases I mentioned earlier. So this is data that gives us incentive to move forward with our mechanism, which is a drug that inhibits the bile acid recycling through the enterohepatic system, which we'll hear more about. So this is really the impetus and the data that says, yes, we think that there's a good, solid scientific rationale to move forward with clinical research, preclinical research, clinical research with this drug. Another source of data for us was the biliary diversion survey that the Alagille Syndrome Alliance posted on their website that many families responded to, 37 respondents, in fact. And it may seem like you fill out a survey here, you participate in a registry there, maybe you're part of Logic, maybe you're not. I just want to reiterate today, if I make no other message clear, I want to reiterate that all of that information that you have provided has led to the protocols that we have developed that we are executing in the clinic, the endpoints that we are looking at, the discussions that we've had with the FDA and other regulatory bodies, including the MHRA in the UK. So whilst it may seem like you're putting information into a black hole sometimes, that information is working for you. So you may or may not have seen the analysis of that data, and this is purely our analysis. But what we did was we looked at every single respondent, where they were before their surgery in terms of itching on a score of 0 to 4, and where they were after the surgery. And generally what you see is itching gets better, whether it's the caregiver who's responding or the patient who's responding. So again, this shows us if you can remove bile acids out of the system, symptom relief occurs with this surgery. An important thing when we were thinking about a clinical trial, how long should a clinical trial be? How long is a piece of string? You want to have a trial that's long enough to give you enough time to see a change, but you don't want to have a trial that's longer than it needs to be because you have patients who are on placebo in that trial, and you want to make sure that you're minimizing the amount of time that any patient is exposed to a placebo drug before, in our situation at least, they can get access to the drug. So what we see here is within a month, half of the patients who respond within 1 month. The bulk of the rest respond within 3 months of their surgery. So this is critical information. Our randomized placebo-controlled trials are 13 weeks long because of this information. So there's a real direct correlation here with how we're doing our research. Another aspect is xanthomas. So obviously, some Alagille syndrome patients have xanthomas, some don't. The patients who did have xanthomas, 70% of those patients saw a reduction in xanthomas after the surgery. But the time frame's a little bit different. So it takes a little bit longer for the xanthomas to resolve after surgery. 27% saw a change within 1 month, some more by 3 months, additional ones by 4 to 6 months, and sometimes longer. So we are evaluating xanthomas in our long-term extension study. It's a 48-week study, so that gives us the time to see whether we're going to see a change in that particular presentation of the disease. I'm not going to go through this slide. I will make the slides available. I'm sorry I wasn't organized enough to get them out to you in advance, but we will make them available. These are really just a summary of the observations. Itching, following the surgery, itching goes away, and it's generally gone within 3 months. Xanthomas decrease. It may take a little bit longer. There's a strong link between reduction in itch and improvement in quality of life. Again, not exactly rocket science, but here's some data to support it. And this is data that we used in discussions with FDA. And partial biliary diversion surgery, it brings with it its own complications and risks. So if there was a once a day in the morning oral solution that achieved the same results as surgery, then that will be an ultimate benefit to the patient population. And that's exactly what we are trying to determine if that's what our drug will do. So we have, I mentioned we've done research with Alagille syndrome families. We've sort of been like a traveling community tromping around the US over the last 2 years. Started off with the Gayman's Picnic in Pennsylvania. We were at the virtual walk in Cape Cod, the family days in Orlando and North Carolina and Los Angeles. Interesting story, and everybody, the world is so small today. I remember seeing the movie 6 Degrees of Separation and thinking, no way. There's no way there's only 6 degrees of separation. I actually think now it's probably less. At the November 2012 Alagille Syndrome Alliance Family Day, I was in the room and I heard a familiar accent. So my accent may not be a giveaway, but I was born and raised in Ireland, in Cork. And there's a family from LA. Do you mind me identifying? Michael O'Shea and I grew up a few blocks apart. My brother went to school with Michael, and we met at an Alagille family day in Los Angeles. His daughter's name is Ciara, who has Alagille syndrome, and she is, in fact, the poster child for our itch study. So even though we may not start out being connected or understanding each other in terms of our disease, your disease versus our research, ultimately, we're all connected, and now I very much feel like I'm part of the Alagille syndrome community, if you'll have me. So this was the first wave of research that we did. And the results of this research were presented to FDA in a 2,000-page packet, I kid you not, it was this big, of research to the agency to understand what are the symptoms associated with Alagille syndrome from a patient perspective, from a family perspective, because FDA really cares about that, and we'll talk about that a bit more in detail when David is giving his presentation. What are the impacts of those symptoms? How do you measure those symptoms, and how do you put that all together in an instrument that you can use in a clinical trial that will assess whether a drug is having its effect? So we made some changes to the instrument based on discussions with FDA, so that meant we had to go back to the drawing board, and these are all the places we went to. Cities all over the country, states all over the country, to meet with families of Alagille syndrome patients and PFIC patients to understand, to make sure that the changes to the instrument didn't change the way it was perceived and understood by the families. And we didn't stop there. We've also taken it international. We have met with families, Alagille syndrome families in Spain, France, Germany, Poland, and US Spanish-speaking families in the US, because not only do we want to do our research in English, we want to do it in a lot of other languages too. Now, obviously there's lots more languages to go, but we're a small company, or at least we were a small company, so we were taking bite-sized chunks of this puzzle. But as you can see, this is a global effort, and this has led to a huge database of research about Alagille syndrome, and we're just now starting to publish and present that data. So not only does it help decide whether the drug that we're evaluating in clinical research has an effect, it provides a body of research from a patient perspective that will be added to the scientific literature for other researchers and regulatory bodies to draw upon. So the first set of data, the really descriptive set of data, we've submitted for presentation at the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease conference that happens later this year in November. So I've mentioned our drug. I've mentioned probably that it's called LUM-001. So what is it? What does it do? So bile acids are secreted from the liver into the GI tract, and then they are essentially sucked back through the enterohepatic system back to the liver via the apical sodium bile acid transporter. So it's a transporter in the wall of the GI that is essential for scavenging bile acids back to the liver. It's very simple. Our drug blocks that. So the bile acids don't go back to the liver. They go into the colon and they get excreted in the feces. So many of our researchers or physicians describe it as a chemical diversion. So you're shunting bile acids out of the body just through a different mechanism, not through a bag or a stoma on the abdomen, but through the stool, through the natural process of the stool. This drug has been shown to lower serum bile acids, both in animal models and in patients, in healthy volunteers, in patients with high cholesterol, and we are evaluating it in patients with cholestatic liver disease right now. I'll show you some data in the next couple of slides about an animal research model that we have completed to show that there's actually, it looks very promising, at least in the animal model. Now, animal models are not perfect, but they at least give us some more information. One important piece, particularly for patients with liver disease, this drug was designed to not be absorbed into the blood system. Most side effects that happen with other drugs is because the drug gets somewhere you don't want it to go. It gets metabolized in the liver. It has an off-target effect. The target is our target's in the gut. The drug stays in the gut by design, and then it's excreted. So it's not going anywhere it has no business to be. And that actually was designed that way to have a more beneficial safety profile. In the subjects, this drug has already been in 12 clinical trials, apart from our research, 12 clinical trials over 1,400 patients and subjects exposed. And it has been demonstrated in those patient populations to have a good safety profile. What does that mean, a good safety profile? It means that there are no serious adverse events associated with this drug, or very, very few serious adverse events associated with this drug. The primary adverse event is actually mechanism related. By increasing the amount of bile in the colon, you can have a gastrointestinal effect. You may have some nausea and cramping and diarrhea because your bile's a detergent. If you put a detergent into a system, it's not going to be neutral. But we see this as almost evidence that the drug is working in one way. It's that those effects are transient and they're almost always mild to moderate in nature. So in terms of the trade-off between serious liver disease and a short-term AE profile that affects patients for a limited period of time, we feel that that's a reasonable risk-benefit. But ultimately, that decision will be made by the patients. And 001, or LUM-001, is currently in clinical trials for Alagille syndrome, progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, primary biliary cirrhosis, and primary sclerosing cholangitis. All cholestatic liver diseases, all with the common characteristic of elevated bile acids. The model that we have demonstrated some effect in is, there's no great model for Alagille syndrome specifically, but what we have done is we essentially tied a cord around the common bile duct to reduce the amount of bile that gets out of the liver. So by, in essence, sort of trying to replicate that paucity of bile ducts that's present in Alagille syndrome. What happens when you do that is, when you look at the stool concentrations of bile acids, you see, this is the normal animal, you see a reduction. So there's less bile getting in the colon, therefore there's less bile in the feces. When you treat with this drug, you see huge increases in fecal bile acid excretion. So you're blocking the ASBT. The bile acids are not recycling back through the enterohepatic system, and they're being excreted in the stool. What does that mean when it comes to biochemistry? I'm sure these are all parameters and analytes that you hear about all the time. If you don't treat the drug, if you treat the animals with a placebo, you see huge increases in serum bile acids. So the bile acids have to go somewhere. They can't get into the colon or the gut, so they go into the serum and they're elevated in the liver. Looking just at the orange bars, what that leads to is increases in GGT, in bilirubin, alkaline phosphatase, AST, and ALT. And when you treat with this drug, you essentially, in this model now, you normalize the biochemistry across the board, particularly at the high dose. So this is really exciting research. Similar research to this was presented at AASLD last year, and this particular research will hopefully be presented there this year. What does that mean to the liver when you get to the tissue? So this is the treated animals, and I'm sorry to get too technical on this, and I'm happy to discuss this in more detail with anybody afterwards. This is the liver section from the treated animals. So you essentially have a normal liver, what looks like a normal liver here. You see the intact bile ducts. You see very few inflammatory cells. In the animals that were not treated, all these dark cells that are not present over here, they're being stained up because they're inflammatory cells. So you've got a lot of disease activity going on here in the untreated animals. So again, this is all very encouraging that this mechanism may actually do something in the clinic. So what do we think that this mechanism can offer in terms of potential? Now this is all potential. We don't have data yet in Alagille syndrome that we can read out on. We have ongoing studies, and I'll tell you about those. But we think that there is the potential for this drug to improve liver function, to slow disease progression, to reduce itching, and ultimately to improve quality and hopefully quantity of life. So what are we measuring in our studies? Serum bile acids, itching, and we look at itching in a variety of different ways. We look at itching from the patient report perspective, from the caregiver perspective, and from the clinician perspective. So we're coming at this from every angle of everybody who's involved in the care of your children. We're looking at how is the liver functioning? What are the markers of liver injury and liver health? Bilirubin, ALP, AST, GGT. We're also looking at fat-soluble vitamins, xanthomas, and quality of life, and a variety of other things that we look at for safety. We want to make sure that we're not improving one thing but having a negative effect somewhere else in the body. So we look at a lot of safety parameters. So what are our studies? We have 4 studies in Alagille syndrome right now, and I'm just going to pop them all up here. And these are all Alagille syndrome patients. Some of them you may recognize, some of them you may not. Aaron lives in the UK, Eunice here in the US, Ciara in the US, and Sophie lives in Australia. So Imago is the first study that we opened. This is the study that we're conducting in the United Kingdom. We're getting very close to completing enrollment in this study, which means we should have data from a placebo-controlled, blinded study, real data that we can interpret in a meaningful, objective manner by the end of this year. When patients finish Imago, they can participate in Imagine, which is the 48-week extension study where all patients get drug, and you have the opportunity to optimize your dose based on your symptoms. So far, touch wood, all patients that have finished Imago have rolled into Imagine. So we have a really good track record here in terms of patients at least wanting to have their life disrupted enough by clinical research to keep on going. And that's no mean feat. I mean, these extra visits and traveling to sites and dosing every day and doing electronic diaries, I mean, this is not an insignificant impact on life. Itch is a study that's very similar in design to Imago that we will be conducting with the Children's Network in the US. We are getting close. It's been taking a little longer than we would have liked, but we are getting close to being able to enroll patients in itch. And again, patients that complete itch can enroll into Imagine. So even if you are randomized to drug in the first study for 13 weeks, you will have the opportunity to go into the Imagine study and studies thereafter. If we're continuing to develop treatments for Alagille syndrome with this product, there will be no end date to your treatment until this drug is available commercially. An Iconic is a study that we are executing in Europe, in Spain, France, Poland, Germany, also in Canada and Australia, to serve those patient populations and make sure that what I mentioned earlier in terms of all Alagille syndrome patients, do they respond the same way, that's true for not just the US and the UK, but for other countries as well. So just wanted to sum up in terms of that our role in research is clear. We come up with the drugs, we make the defense, we go to the FDA, we get approval to do studies, we conduct the studies. We can do all of that, but without you, that's all for nothing. So your role in research, and one point that again I wanted to make clear that resonates is the information you share really matters. So whether it's surveys or interviews with us or others or the registries, it really advances the understanding of Alagille syndrome. It has shaped and molded how we have designed our clinical trials. It helps us develop the right instruments to measure the symptoms that impact your life in the most meaningful ways. And it provides a platform for discussions with FDA, which ultimately, and EMA and every other regulatory agency in the world. And participation in clinical trials. My goal is not to get every family to sign up for a clinical trial. My goal is that every family is aware that there is an option in terms of clinical research. So the awareness piece comes from us. The be informed piece is up to you. If you're interested, we will give you all the information you need to make that decision for you, your family, and your child. And consult with your physician. So the doctors that are involved in our studies are very well informed about this drug, about the protocols, about what it will mean for participating, and whether it's a good fit for your family and your child. So I would say your first protocol, I mean, we are certainly here to give you information, but your first protocol should be your physician and talk to them about the research. If they're not participating in the research, we will get you into the study if that's something you want to do. We will support patients who are willing to travel to centers who are in itch, for example, in the US or anywhere else to the degree we can, and just talk to us. Don't be afraid to come with a proposal to us in terms of your participation. And I will finish with a thank you very much. Very happy to be here.